On my channel, I like to talk about topics that, on first glance, might seem like they don't need a video essay about them. Might be something we hear all the time, maybe we take it for granted, but stop and give it some thought, and then you realize maybe it's not so simple. Spirituality is a word I see regularly, on dating apps of all places, but a clear definition never comes to mind for me. And when I dug into it, it turns out the researchers writing papers on the subject have the exact same struggle. On hearing the word, you might just think of it as a placeholder for religion, since there's been a bit of a cultural shift over the last few decades. For a big chunk of history, it was taken for granted most people in North America, Europe, and many other places would be some flavor of Christianity. But around the 1960s, things started to change. Societal changes in beliefs about personal freedom led to an expanding definition of spirituality, where an individual's spiritual journey was seen as something completely separated from religious institutions. In the 2010s, 65% of Americans considered themselves very spiritual or moderately spiritual, and 27% considered themselves spiritual but not religious. That said, spirituality and religion aren't overly separate from one another, because the two still overlap in many people's minds. Surveys of the population found that education, age, race, ethnicity, religious tradition, and worship attendance are associated with varieties of spirituality, some involving God and some not. And of all demographics, age and gender were established as the two main factors for groups identifying as the most spiritual. Spirituality pretty consistently increases as people get older, and spirituality is also significantly higher among women compared to men. Recent studies of people who identify as spiritual but not religious are more likely to be younger, white, female, with higher education, and from wealthier families. Women are more likely than men to have spiritual components in their life, including praying, seeking direction from religious advisors, getting comfort from faith, and expressing reverence for spiritual concepts. Spirituality may deal with religion, but religion is a very specific, ordered, and ritualized form of spirituality. People can be religious without spirituality, and spiritual without religion. While religion tries to help us feel good about the lives we're living, true spirituality is much more complicated, having long-term effects that lead us to a kind of transformation or inner metamorphosis to achieve higher levels of development. In the present day, it's normal for people to use terms like Eastern spiritualities, feminist spirituality, goodness spirituality, as people pick and choose from different sets of belief ideas to form their own customized self-religion. Like studies of social sciences, spirituality has become specialized. It's viewable through different lenses, like spirituality and physical health, and gender and spirituality. But so far, I haven't addressed the question of what we mean when people say spirituality. I've mentioned it before, but I was raised Jehovah's Witness, and when I left, I was pretty bitter about religion for a long time, so I hadn't given spirituality a lot of thought. But over the years, I've studied different religions, Zoroastrianism being one of the coolest, in my opinion, but it wasn't until I took an introduction to Indigenous Peoples class where the term spirituality came up outside of a religious context. An article we read for class explained how many First Nations communities believe spirituality can be expressed and practiced through activities like making art, music, or spending time in nature. And my mind just always keeps drifting back to that idea. Music's always been an important part of my life, and art too, something I work on every day to help unwind. And I have another video I made on fun that looks at the benefits of music and art in more detail. But never on my own would I have made that connection, that art and music could be considered spiritual. It also brings up some weird ideas about AI being used to make art and music, which I'll touch on later. In that context, it does make me think spirituality is more about eliciting a feeling, trying to integrate more fully with the world around you, feeling like everything is fitting together. Accomplishment and fulfillment for some purpose through art. Of course, there's more to it than that, because that's just one perspective, and other people's ideas about spirituality go way beyond that definition. It seems the people most interested in talking about spirituality as a legitimate topic for academic study are having the most difficulty defining it, and their theories are weakened by not having a coherent definition of spirituality grounded in a worldview that everyone can understand regardless of previous experience, or their lack of experience, with religion and spirituality. So what happens in a lot of these papers is the definition ends up becoming the focal point. Spirituality as a concept goes back in its origin to, you guessed it, the Bible. I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of individual words because the Bible's been translated and retranslated many times in many languages, but in the New Testament, specifically 1 Corinthians 2 verse 14, Paul refers to the spiritual man and contrasts this idea to other people who only exist on the level of the material world. In Christianity, spirituality is about having the capital S Spirit, the separate entity in the Holy Trinity, sometimes depicted as a dove, and this includes an attraction to things related to spirit and being less interested in earthly things or physical desires. The word spirit comes from the Latin word spiritus, which means breath, or it can mean the life-giving force or animating principle, something said to make humans different from animals, perhaps the idea of the soul. Spirituality can be the quality of being concerned with life force, the source. If that's a bearded man in the sky or something else, it's thought our spirit is a kind of hinting, our attempt to know or maybe remember who we truly are, our true nature. Even though that's the definition in strict terms, it really isn't what comes to mind for many people as a definition. Spirituality to many can refer to something as basic as conventional Protestant-shaped religious practice and experience. That's probably how I would have defined spirituality when I was young. Spirituality can encompass traditional Christian beliefs, combining any number of smaller religious practices, like local saints or other practices that may be from previous religions that were integrated into Christianity from particular regions. It can also just be appreciation of natural beauty or reflection on life's meaning. Spirituality has also been defined as the relationship between an individual and sacred forces. In this way, spirituality can be used as a tool for overcoming challenges and hardships in a person's life. Spirituality is linked to persistence and coping abilities because of the meaning that it instills in their life. Spirituality may simply be the label on attempting to answer questions like what exists, who or what is in charge, and what's the purpose of existence. Spirituality may be a quest to build a relationship between what a person truly is and everything else in existence, and that's how the self as a whole relates to the cosmos as a whole. Spirituality could also be understood as mental capacity, as transcendence of critical reasoning. In this way, it's more of a cognitive development, which is a point other definitions touch on as well, a development in the way a person understands the world and approaches life events, starting with understanding the meaning of why you exist. Spirituality may be a line of development and personal growth, more along the lines of cognitive or psychological development. It can be an attitude or a series of peak experiences that's translated through whatever the individual's current stage of development is currently at. There's also a definition of spirituality far removed from the other definitions, where you're talking about the belief in ghosts, magic, relationships with the dead. I guess the word supernatural is more used for that these days. Many people still consider those things spiritual. How I define spirituality, if I were just examining the word in a vacuum, is different from those other definitions. Broadly and simply, I would say it's just a belief in things beyond the tangible world. The spiritual realm being the opposite of the material realm. Things we cannot perceive with the five senses, but we know in some other way that they exist. That's a pretty broad definition and maintains separation from religion, but it's much more of a literal definition that leaves out the psychological component and the feelings that people connect to spirituality. So it doesn't seem adequate in the sense that it doesn't align with the definition a lot of people have in their own mind. And part of the problem in defining spirituality is the challenge that's inherent in putting feelings into words. These ideas, by their very definition, are intangible. And another thing that comes up a lot in the papers interviewing people on their definition of spirituality is that their understanding comes from their experience. So you need that same level of experience to be understood. There's also the belief that there is no one right way to define spirituality, that it's entirely subjective. It's helpful to examine the variety of definitions and how diverse they seem to be. There are also definitions similar to what I already mentioned, but have a lot of crossover with some moderate differences. But if I were to create some new definition, based on what I've read, it would be something like an individual's relationship with non-physical forces that motivate them to develop that relationship through self-improvement, physically or mentally, in ways that lead to greater life satisfaction and universal harmony. Implicit in that definition, too, is the idea that spiritual differences are often unique and rooted in feeling, so contain components that cannot be described, only experienced. So now that we've gone as far as we can with definition, what do we do with the concept we call spirituality? One theme that comes out repeatedly in the literature is the idea that spirituality can lead to transcendence in relation to both transcending yourself and transcending along with a higher being, a sense of communion or connection, faiths and beliefs and hope. Again, this transcendence provides a strong sense of identity or direction, and that can influence a person's beliefs, attitudes, emotions, and behavior. The highest level of development may lead to death of the ego, which is considered a good thing, but that's an entirely separate topic. So would we as individuals ever want to develop spiritually? Well, the research indicates there's benefits to this, so I think it's a good idea. Spiritual well-being brings a sense of peace, comfort, and strength that arises from a sense of meaning and purpose often linked to connection to the transcendent, but also comes from other activities like art and music and relationships with other people. Because we all have relationships and activities that provide us with meaning and purpose, a level of spiritual well-being is a common measurement. Spiritual seems rooted in the psychological. Spiritual well-being is related to mood, and our psychological state is a major contributor to spiritual well-being. This comes back to the idea of affect, positive affect being generally associated with a good mood maintained over long periods, and negative affect is anxiety and depression. If we can maintain a spiritual well-being, this gives us a better chance of maintaining positive affect, which I think is something universal that everyone should work towards. When we talk about spiritual distress, however, it's more than severe depression or suffering. It's not just negative affect. It's when a person's sense of meaning and purpose is threatening their existence. Spirituality is now being given careful consideration with medical professionals who deal with heavy subjects like cancer treatment, chronic pain management, and other serious illnesses. Religion or spiritual coping strategies are associated with feelings of spiritual support and connection, as well as reduced depression and anxiety, and peace and calm. And so by indirectly reducing pain through a spiritual connection, they can reduce the drugs needed and improve overall patient care. Spirituality has been and continues to be studied extensively in relation to healthcare, and that's because spiritual beliefs and development have been shown to improve tolerance of acute and chronic pain. As a result, addressing spirituality has become an important aspect of pain management. Spirituality ascribes meaning to people's suffering and can improve self-efficacy, social support, distraction, relaxation, and can contribute to positive reappraisal of someone's life situations. One study examined the role of spirituality in healthcare and patient recovery with the goal of determining how to maximize positive patient outcomes. The study identified the importance of making sure patients stay connected with religious practices if they have them, as well as more generally getting to know what matters the most to those patients, offering other approaches to spirituality, music, pet therapy, contact in nature, shared gym activities, social meal times, keeping patients connected to their families, and reminding patients of what matters in their own life. Patients need to be seen as individuals expressing their spirit in their own way and need to be supported by the medical staff. Spiritual well-being is also important in end-of-life care. Often, though, physicians seldom engage in spiritual conversations, and when asked, doctors say it's because of a lack of time, lack of training, and difficulty identifying patients who actually want to discuss it. Usually, only if the doctors themselves are spiritually invested do they incorporate spiritual elements in their practice. There's lots of good reasons not mentioned why doctors may not want to discuss spiritual topics. It could be a source of conflict if they disagree with the patient, or it could just be that it makes the doctor uncomfortable or the doctor hasn't considered spiritual matters themselves. They might think it's all hogwash, and because doctor training is already so intensive, it seems daunting to train them in an area that's so diametrically opposed to the materialistic and scientific nature of being a doctor, at least how doctors are currently. A more natural way to weave spirituality into medicine would be in psychotherapeutic practice. Participants in one study stated that their spiritual practice evolved from personal development, enabling them to try to become better people. This usually means living according to ideals and morals about how to be in the world and how to relate to others, something previously attributed to religion. But the morality of spiritual but non-religious people hasn't been well studied. The main reason many people develop a spiritual life is for the spiritual connection itself, as it gives them peace and connectedness, and helps them apply philosophical principles in their everyday lives. Connecting with others is the most frequent issue brought up by most clients. They use spirituality as self-development to help them relate to other people in a positive way. They're able to transcend an immediate gut response and instead see situations from a broader, more encompassing perspective. People can also benefit from the self-reflection spiritual practices provide, considering their own beliefs and examining whether they are useful and true. Group therapy or other work like student counseling sessions can be used to share emotions and life experience. People can help one another to work through challenges and recognize their own strengths after hardship. The meaning of our lives, rooted in our relationship with spiritual forces, permeates into everything we do and unifies our actions. Decisions we make need to be consistent with the broader reality of life. Spirituality is looking beyond today, contextualizing our life in totality. Spiritual experiences are experiences of a reality beyond the ego and its immediate needs. Science fills some needs of spirituality, but only as far as materialism can. There's an inner experience going on that goes beyond the material world. Human consciousness has some direct access to the structure of reality in a way that isn't easily articulated, but most people can sense. As I mentioned, some definitions focus on spirituality as a path of personal development, occurring in distinct and specific stages. The most well-developed theory is Fowler's stages of spiritual development. With Fowler, the stage of spiritual development a person is at determines the level of extra senses or wisdom they might possess. It's sometimes described at how much they remember or wisdom retained from before they were born, manifesting in how you live your life, and can be the strongest indicator of who a person really is beyond the ego. This is also linked to a person's intuition. Stage 0 of Fowler's stages is a sensory motor, and is generally from when a baby is born to about age 2. It's really primitive, as you would expect a baby to have. It's more along the lines of approaching things that seem good and avoiding what they perceive as bad. But the sum of these experiences is cumulative, can lead the child to experience positive feelings about the world, harmony and trust, or negative experiences that might result from varying levels of neglect or punishment, leading to feelings of fear and distrust. Stage 1 is called intuitive projective, occurring around ages 3 to 7. This happens when the child is able to grasp language and the symbolic world, imagination, imitation, and impressionability. The child encounters stories, images, influence of other people, develops a childlike intuitive sense of right and wrong that is very recognizable at this age. Stage 2 is mythic literal, embracing stories, beliefs, rules, and attitudes that symbolize belonging. It usually happens around ages 7 to 12, and they are able to conceptualize an anthropomorphic god and metaphors that might be discussed at religious services. These metaphors might be taken literally, but can form more concrete ideas and logical thinking. Stage 3, called synthetic conventional, often occurs in adolescence and is often the final stage for some adults. It consists of conformist expectations and judgment of others with no sure grasp on the self's own identity and perspective. Conflicts that come up when someone's beliefs are challenged are often ignored as they form a threat to this identity if it's rooted in their faith. Some people never move past this level of development. Stage 4 is individuative reflective, a stage where a person takes seriously commitments, lifestyle, beliefs, and attitudes. Tensions surface, usually in their mid-30s or 40s, but may also happen in the 20s. There's a struggle sorting out more complex religious and spiritual beliefs, seeing the gray shades of nuance, and taking more personal responsibility for their beliefs. This can lead to conflict between different ideas the person has been exposed to. Stage 5 is called conjunctive, where the seeker develops a second naivete, acting in a way that is sometimes described as being born again, when someone reclaims and reworks their past, opens themselves up to voices of the deeper self, and recognizes unconscious myths and prejudices. They become open to the truth of the other in a way they were not previously able to. They acknowledge inherent paradoxes in human existence, and may move beyond conventional religious or traditional beliefs. They may understand truth as something that cannot simply be articulated, nor attached to any single faith. Stage 6 is exceedingly rare, the form referred to as universalizing of faith involving discipline, activist incarnation, realizing imperatives of absolute love and justice. Time is spent by them transforming the present reality into transcendent actuality. Individuals regard all beings as worthy of compassion and understanding. They become the example of highly regarded religious figures and practice transcendent ideals and demonstrate their love for fellow people. So these ideas may all be new to you, or maybe you've always had spiritual forms and beliefs in your life and think it's all obvious, and this is because perspectives on spirituality are always socially patterned. They flow from social location and experience, so that usually starts from your parents or larger family and can extend to the community you grow up in. And like most things that are socially conditioned in us, it's always something we can consciously change with reflection and awareness, if we want to change. I'm sure many people don't give it much thought, but I think it's worth some examination. You don't need to agree with anyone on it. It could just be some conscious decisions you make about your life. You don't have to talk about it or explain yourself to anyone. But the benefits seem significant in developing resilience to hard times and suffering, and it can help you improve in other ways. A lot of people don't even want to bring up their spiritual views or talk about anyone else's for fear of being judged or being accused of being insensitive or even heretical. Some view spirituality as a positive influence on their lives, but to others it's negative because of beliefs being imposed on them. It's possible for a professional's disillusionment to religion to interfere with their ability to counsel a religious client. Likewise, someone who's religious might be unable to relate to a non-religious client. It's such an individual experience that it's hard to create an environment where all views can be respected, leaving judgment behind. When education addresses spiritual topics, they obviously need to approach it with sensitivity due to its subjective nature and at the same time avoid rigid dogma, because by its nature it is controversial and personal. Hosting educational, open-ended workshops where multiple perspectives are examined and not having a set plan for what to discuss is more effective as it can go in whatever directions it needs to. I do find it interesting having this realization that exercising creativity and creating art and music can be considered spirituality, right around the same time we've seen a rise in AI tools that can be used to generate pictures, poems, songs, and videos. I still think it's a bit odd, of all the things to automate, developers chose creative aspects that a lot of people enjoy, and that was something to be automated with large language models. The depletion of resources due to data centers also mean there's going to be less natural habitat where humans can go and spend time in nature. If you're just looking at the result, it can almost look like an assault on human spirituality, but it could also just be coincidence. I couldn't find much research on AI and spirituality at this point, not about the implications anyways. Mostly it's just talk about making large language models that work like a priest chatbot, which again is weird. But despite what they might be saying, you won't have AI as a replacement for spirituality. And that's because a major component of spirituality is specific to you as an individual. It's about your personal development and growing as a person, understanding and doing things that make your life feel worthwhile, and ChatGPT output is not going to give you any kind of raw spiritual fulfillment. So to conclude, spirituality is a highly personal collection of feelings and philosophical ideas about how to live life and become a better person. There's many ways to practice spirituality, from traditional religion to artistic pursuits or social activities that allow you to connect to others and express yourself. Cultivating spirituality can infuse your life with purpose and inspire you to endure the toughest aspects of life, giving you grit or resilience to recover when bad things happen. The best part about developing spirituality is that it's really only limited by your imagination, and you can take it in any direction you want to bring to life whatever you envision about being your best self. Thanks for watching.